What happens when Hollywood's most respected actor meets a host who crosses every line imaginable? You won't believe what unfolds when Michael B. Jordan sits down for what should have been a routine promotional interview, only to find himself trapped in a verbal minefield that explodes into one of the most shocking confrontations in late-night television history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when professional courtesy dies and raw tension takes over. The atmosphere in Studio 6A felt different from the moment Michael B. Jordan walked through those familiar glass doors. Fresh off his latest blockbuster success, the critically acclaimed actor had agreed to appear on Jimmy Kimmel Live to discuss his upcoming projects and recent philanthropic work. What should have been a standard promotional stop on the late-night circuit was about to become something far more sinister. Backstage, the usual pre-show energy buzzed through the corridors, but those familiar with the show's inner workings noticed something unusual. Kimmel had been in his dressing room longer than normal, and when he finally emerged, there was a particular gleam in his eye that veteran crew members recognized as trouble. The host had been dealing with declining ratings for months, and whispers around the studio suggested he was growing increasingly desperate for viral moments that would generate buzz. Jordan, meanwhile, maintained his characteristic professionalism as he went through the standard pre-interview routine. Dressed in a sharp navy suit that perfectly complemented his confident demeanor, he chatted warmly with makeup artists and production assistants, completely unaware of what was brewing behind the scenes. The actor had always been known for his grace under pressure and his ability to handle even the most challenging interview situations with class. As the show's opening monologue concluded and the familiar theme music began to play, Jordan made his way to the guest chair, exchanging pleasantries with Kimmel during the commercial break. The host's smile seemed genuine enough, but there was something calculating behind it that would soon become apparent to millions of viewers watching at home. "We're back with Michael B. Jordan, everybody," Kimmel announced as the cameras rolled, his voice carrying that trademark sardonic tone that had made him famous. "Michael, thanks for being here. I have to say, you look great, but then again, you always do. That's kind of your thing, isn't it?" The comment landed with an odd undertone that made Jordan shift slightly in his chair. "I appreciate that, Jimmy. I try to stay in shape, you know. It's part of the job." "Part of the job," Kimmel repeated, nodding slowly. "Right, right. Speaking of the job, let's talk about your latest movie. Another action flick where you get to show off those muscles and be the hero. Must be nice to have Hollywood literally built around your image." There was something in the way Kimmel emphasized your image that made the studio audience uncomfortable. Jordan, ever the professional, maintained his composure, but viewers could see the slightest tightening around his eyes. "Well, I'm fortunate to work with incredible directors and writers who create these complex characters," Jordan responded diplomatically. "It's not just about the physical aspects. These roles allow me to explore different emotional depths and connect with audiences on multiple levels." Kimmel leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Multiple levels. That's interesting, because I've been watching your career, Michael, and I have to ask, don't you ever get tired of playing the same character over and over again? The brooding, intense guy with the perfect body who saves the day?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jordan's media training kicked in, but there was a flash of something in his expression that suggested he was beginning to recognize this wasn't going to be the typical softball interview he'd expected. "I think that's a pretty reductive way to look at the work," Jordan replied, his voice steady but carrying a new edge. "Each character I've played has been distinct, with their own motivations, struggles, and growth arcs. From Adonis Creed to Eric Killmonger to the roles in my more dramatic work, I've always tried to bring authenticity and depth to every performance." "Authenticity," Kimmel repeated, drawing out the word. "That's fascinating, because I've been doing some research on you, Michael, and I have to say, for someone who talks a lot about authenticity, you seem to have a pretty carefully constructed public image, don't you?" The studio grew noticeably quieter. This wasn't the direction anyone had expected the interview to take, least of all Jordan himself. The actor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he processed what he was hearing. "I'm not sure what you're getting at, Jimmy," Jordan said, his tone remaining professional but with an unmistakable warning underlying it. Kimmel's grin widened, sensing he had found his angle. "Oh, come on, Michael, don't play coy with me. You've got this whole perfect guy thing down to a science. The charity work, the inspirational interviews, the way you handle yourself in the media. It's all very calculated, isn't it?" The word calculated hit like a slap. Jordan sat forward in his chair, his diplomatic mask beginning to slip. "Calculated? Jimmy, I think you might want to be careful about the assumptions you're making here." But Kimmel was just getting started, and the predatory gleam in his eyes suggested he had no intention of backing down. The host had found his controversy, and he was going to milk it for everything it was worth, regardless of the consequences. "I'm just saying," Kimmel continued, his voice taking on a mock-innocent tone. "It's interesting how you've managed to avoid any real scandals, any real controversy. In Hollywood, that's almost suspicious, don't you think? Like maybe you're hiding something, or maybe you're just really, really good at managing your image." The accusation hung between them like a loaded weapon, and Jordan's expression darkened considerably. The friendly, promotional atmosphere had completely evaporated, replaced by something far more dangerous. The actor's hands gripped the arms of his chair as he stared at Kimmel with barely contained intensity. "You know what, Jimmy?" Jordan said, his voice dropping to a lower register that everyone in the studio could feel. "I came here tonight to talk about my work, my projects, and maybe have some fun. But if you want to sit here and make baseless insinuations about my character, then we're going to have a problem." The tension in the room was palpable now. But instead of backing down, Kimmel seemed energized by the confrontation he had manufactured. His next words would push the situation past the point of no return, setting the stage for a showdown that would dominate headlines and social media feeds for days to come. "Look, Michael," Kimmel said, leaning forward with that trademark smirk that now seemed more sinister than playful. "I'm just asking the questions that everyone else is thinking, but too polite to ask. You've got this squeaky clean image, but come on, nobody's that perfect. What's the real story? What are you hiding?" The studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the light-hearted banter they'd come to expect from these interviews. Even the cameramen seemed uncertain, glancing at each other as if wondering whether they should keep rolling. But Jordan's response cut through the awkwardness like a blade. "What am I hiding?" Jordan's voice was dangerously quiet now, each word precisely enunciated. "Jimmy, I think you need to take a step back and think about what you're doing here. You invited me on your show to promote my work, not to participate in some kind of character assassination." But Kimmel was riding the wave of his own manufactured controversy, apparently oblivious to the warning signs that everyone else in the room could see. "Character assassination? That's a strong phrase, Michael. I'm just having a conversation. Unless there's something you're worried about people finding out?" The implication was clear, and Jordan's composure finally began to crack. His jaw clenched visibly as he stared at the host, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of barely controlled anger. "You know what, Jimmy? I've been nothing but respectful to you and your show. I've answered your questions, I've played along with your bits, and I've treated you with the courtesy that one professional extends to another. But what you're doing right now? This isn't journalism, this isn't entertainment, this is just pathetic." The word pathetic landed like a physical blow. Kimmel's expression shifted, his manufactured confidence flickering for just a moment before hardening into something uglier. The host had started this confrontation as a calculated move for ratings, but now it was becoming personal. "Pathetic?" Kimmel's voice rose slightly, his casual demeanor cracking. "You know what's pathetic, Michael? Sitting there acting like you're above all this when you're just another Hollywood pretty boy who thinks his success makes him untouchable." The studio fell into complete silence. Even the band members looked stunned by the escalation. This had gone far beyond uncomfortable television into something genuinely hostile. Jordan's hands gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles were visible, and when he spoke, his voice carried a dangerous edge that made everyone in the room tense. "Hollywood pretty boy?" Jordan repeated slowly, his tone absolutely frigid. "Is that what you think this is about? You think I'm sitting here because of my looks? Because I'm some kind of manufactured celebrity who doesn't deserve his success?" Kimmel, perhaps realizing he'd crossed a line but unable to back down without losing face, doubled down on his attack. "I'm just saying, Michael, success in Hollywood isn't always about talent. Sometimes it's about image, about playing the game, about knowing the right people. And you've played that game better than most." "The game?" Jordan's voice was rising now, his professional facade completely abandoned. "You want to talk about games, Jimmy? Let's talk about what you're doing right now. You're sitting there, trying to tear down someone who's worked their entire life to get where they are, and for what? For ratings? For a few viral clips? That's not just pathetic, that's disgusting." The confrontation had reached a boiling point, but Kimmel seemed determined to push it even further. His next words would prove to be the final straw, the moment that would transform this from an uncomfortable interview into a full-scale media incident. "Worked their entire life?" Kimmel's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Come on, Michael. You got your break because you look good with your shirt off. Let's not pretend this is some inspiring story of talent overcoming adversity. You're successful because you're pretty and you know how to work out." The studio erupted in gasps and murmurs. Even Kimmel's most loyal audience members seemed shocked by the blatant disrespect. Jordan sat perfectly still for a moment, processing what he'd just heard, and when he finally responded, his voice was deadly calm. "You know what, Jimmy? I've heard enough." Jordan's hands released their grip on the chair arms as he prepared to stand. "I came here tonight to talk about my work, my craft, and the projects I'm passionate about. Instead, I find myself sitting across from someone who apparently thinks success is something that just gets handed to people like me." Kimmel realized he might have gone too far, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. "Hey, I'm just being honest here. Isn't that what good television is supposed to be? Honest conversations?" "Honest?" Jordan's laugh was bitter and sharp. "There's nothing honest about what you're doing, Jimmy. You're not interested in having a conversation. You're interested in creating a moment, manufacturing controversy, and you don't care who you hurt in the process." The actor stood up slowly, his imposing frame casting a shadow over the desk that separated him from Kimmel. The host suddenly looked much smaller, his bravado beginning to crumble as he realized the situation was spiraling completely out of his control. "Where are you going, Michael?" Kimmel asked, his voice betraying the first hint of uncertainty he'd shown all evening. "We're not done here." Jordan looked down at him with a mixture of disgust and pity. "Oh, we're done, Jimmy. We're more than done, because I'm not going to sit here and let you disrespect me, my work, or my community for your entertainment." The mention of community seemed to hit Kimmel particularly hard, and his response revealed just how deep his desperation ran. "Community? What community? The community of people who got where they are because of their genetics instead of their talent?" The studio gasped audibly. Several audience members could be heard expressing their shock and disapproval. Even the production crew seemed stunned by the host's words. Jordan stood perfectly still, his entire body radiating controlled fury as he processed what he'd just heard. "You know what, Jimmy?" Jordan's voice was so quiet now that the microphones barely picked it up, but somehow that made it even more menacing. "I think you just showed everyone exactly who you really are, and I think we're done here." As Jordan began to remove his lapel microphone, Kimmel made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation, but his words would only make everything infinitely worse. "Wait, wait, Michael!" Kimmel called out, his voice cracking with desperation, as he realized his manufactured controversy was about to walk away from him. "Don't be so sensitive. This is just comedy, man. This is what we do here. Can't you take a joke? The word sensitive hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jordan's hands froze on his microphone, and when he looked up at Kimmel, his expression was one of pure, undiluted contempt. The studio had gone so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning system seemed deafening. Sensitive? Jordan's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of a thunderclap. You think this is about being sensitive? You think spending the last 15 minutes trying to tear down everything I've worked for is comedy? Kimmel's face was flushed now, sweat beading on his forehead as he realized he'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. But instead of backing down, his ego drove him to make one final devastating mistake. Look, Michael, I'm sorry if you can't handle some tough questions. Maybe you should stick to movies where you don't have to think on your feet, where someone else writes your lines for you. The studio erupted. Audience members could be heard shouting their disapproval, with several people standing up from their seats. The house band looked mortified, and even the production crew seemed to be stepping back from their positions. Jordan stood perfectly still for a long moment, his chest rising and falling as he processed the magnitude of what Kimmel had just said. You know what, Jimmy? Jordan's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. You're right about one thing. Someone else does write my lines. Professional writers, talented writers. Writers who understand that entertainment doesn't have to come at the expense of human dignity. Jordan moved closer to Kimmel's desk, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. But right now, these are my words, and I want to make sure you understand exactly what I'm saying to you. Kimmel shrank back in his chair, his bravado completely evaporated. For the first time since the interview began, he looked genuinely afraid. Michael, I think we should just— No, Jordan interrupted, his voice sharp and final. You don't get to talk anymore. You've said enough. You've shown everyone exactly who you are, and now it's my turn. The actor's voice rose, filling the studio with a power and authority that made everyone present understand they were witnessing something unprecedented. You want to know what's really pathetic, Jimmy? It's not my success. It's not my work. It's not the opportunities I've earned. Through years of dedication and sacrifice, Jordan's eyes blazed with righteous fury as he continued. What's pathetic is a man who's been given a platform, a voice, and a responsibility to entertain people, and instead chooses to use that platform to tear others down. What's pathetic is someone who thinks comedy means humiliation, that entertainment means destruction. The host tried to interject, but Jordan's voice overpowered him completely. You want to talk about image? Let's talk about yours, because after tonight, everyone's going to know exactly what kind of person you really are. They're going to see someone who invited a guest onto his show and then spent the entire time trying to destroy them for no reason other than his own insecurity. Kimmel's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his usual quick wit completely abandoned. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd set fire to his own house while standing inside it. And you know what the worst part is? Jordan continued, his voice now carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. I actually felt sorry for you when I walked in here tonight. I could see the desperation in your eyes, the way you've been struggling with your ratings, the way you've been trying to stay relevant in a changing industry. The personal nature of the attack hit Kimmel like a physical blow. His face went pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of his desk. But instead of showing compassion, instead of giving you the benefit of the doubt, I should have recognized what you were really trying to do. You weren't looking for an interview. You were looking for a victim. Someone you could sacrifice on the altar of your own failing career. Jordan straightened up, his full height making him tower over the seated host. Well, congratulations, Jimmy. You got your viral moment, you got your controversy, but you know what else you got? You got to show the entire world exactly what happens when someone mistakes cruelty for creativity. The actor began walking toward the edge of the stage, but he turned back one final time, his voice carrying across the stunned studio with devastating clarity. And just so we're clear, this has nothing to do with me being sensitive. This has everything to do with you being a bully. And bullies don't deserve platforms. They don't deserve audiences. And they sure as hell don't deserve respect. Kimmel finally found his voice, but it came out as a desperate croak. "Michael, please. I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding." Jordan cut him off without even looking back. "This was exactly what you wanted it to be. The only difference is, you thought I was going to sit there and take it. You thought you could treat me like some kind of prop in your desperate attempt to create content." The actor reached the edge of the stage and turned to face the audience, his voice now addressing them directly. "I want to apologize to everyone who came here tonight expecting to see professional entertainment. You deserved better than this. You deserved better than watching someone use their platform to try to humiliate a guest." Several audience members applauded, and the sound grew until it filled the studio. It wasn't the manufactured applause of a talk show audience. It was genuine, heartfelt approval for someone who had stood up to a bully. Jordan nodded to the audience, then looked back at Kimmel one final time. "Jimmy, I hope you figure out what kind of person you want to be. Because right now, you're not someone I recognize as a fellow professional, and you're certainly not someone I respect as a human being." With that, Michael B. Jordan walked off the set, leaving behind a studio in complete chaos. Kimmel sat at his desk, his face a mask of shock and humiliation, as the reality of what he had just done began to sink in. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of his mortification as the audience continued to applaud Jordan's departure. The show's producers scrambled to cut to commercial, but the damage was done. In the span of 20 minutes, Kimmel had transformed what should have been a routine promotional interview into a career-defining disaster. As Jordan disappeared through the studio doors, the host was left alone at his desk, staring at the wreckage of his own making, finally understanding that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. The studio fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of the audience filing out and the whispered conversations of crew members who had just witnessed the end of an era. Kimmel's desperate gambit for relevance had backfired spectacularly, and everyone present knew they had just watched something that would be remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling.